I want to go back to Hebrews chapter 11 and verse 1. We commonly call it the definition of faith. I'm not convinced that it's a total definition of faith. I think there's a whole lot more to it than just these words. But these words are particularly important, and I want to try to show you how it works. Now, faith is remember what it says?
Assurance.
All right, it's assurance, and it's being certain. It's being certain, sure of what we hope for, and certain or sure of what we do not see. What we hope for and what we can't see. So, have you ever thought about how difficult that is? To be sure and certain of that which you cannot see. And maybe even put this statement, of that which you can't understand. So I was in a meeting today with some, I guess, what's called scholars. And I used an illustration that I had been told that one had said the story of Jonah cannot possibly be real. And I said, but the person who told me that was related to me, actually a granddaughter, and I said to her, but there are a lot of things in the Bible that you just have to choose to believe, and it's called faith. I said, what makes it any harder for you to believe that a fish can swallow somebody and they can exist inside that fish for 3 days than to believe that you can walk around the wall of a giant city with giant walls 7 days, and the 7th day, 7 times, the walls just fall? Which is harder to believe? In fact, the Bible is absolutely filled with stories that don't even come close to fitting how I think. So faith is a choice. But the kind of choice it's involved in is I'm absolutely certain of things that I hope will happen, that have been promised to me that will happen, I hope will happen, and I'm certain, though I cannot see it, I cannot comprehend it. I make myself certain. Now, with that definition comes a great strength that lies within us to exist in what I'm calling a crazy world. And I don't think the world's crazy today just because it's today. I think the world's been crazy for a long time, to every generation. It just maybe it's a little crazier today than ever before. And to be able to exist in this world, we have to have faith. And you remember Sunday, if you can possibly remember Sunday, what I kind of talked about, I said that we have this one verse tucked in Romans chapter 15 where it talks about God giving us this hope, and we are able to have this joy, and we're able to have this peace as we trust in Him, as we have confidence in Him. And I talked about how there are some things in life, just in everyday life, that's very difficult for us to continue to have hope. Everybody understand that? So when we put my dad in a nursing home, not being able to see, and knowing that he would not get to go back to his house, knowing that he was stuck in this unfamiliar environment, how do you think he felt about his hope of going home, or hope of life getting back to normal? It wasn't going to happen. He knew it wasn't going to happen. But for people of God, that's not the only hope that we have. So beyond that nursing home, what would have been his hope? It would be heaven. And so he would say to me one night, I saw Mama. And I said, what was she doing? He said she had her hands out, said, come on. And I said, well, maybe that's good. Maybe she really wants you to come on. Maybe it's time. Trying to be encouraging. Now, I want you to go back and think about verse 7. I want you to think about Noah. Noah was warned about things that he had not seen. Now, what kind of things was Noah warned about? A flood. As simple as that. It's a flood. Had he ever seen a flood before? Hadn't he seen rain? No, he had never seen anything like this. But this is not, if I could even comprehend what a flood would look like, this is one like no one's ever seen. Could you even, tonight, could you even really truly begin to comprehend a flood like that flood? Now, I've seen the Ouachita River out really badly. Okay? I've seen the Canadian River out really badly, bumping up against the bottom of the bridge. Susan and I in college would go down and watch that water. I love to watch that water. I've ridden with your granddad and your Uncle Luther, squeezing a pickup. All we could see is the narrow lane of a highway all the way from Luther to Chandler, looking at water as far as you could see. I mean, I've seen some floods, but I hadn't seen a flood that covered the top of my house. Some people have. But I haven't seen a flood that would cover, in your world, the top of Pikes Peak. You know, we're talking about deep. A flood that would cover the top of Mount Everest. And yet, God told me that's what is going to happen. That's how it's going to be. The problem with that is, what does time do to hope? You're right, it kills it. How does time kill hope? What does that do for us? You know, it makes you lose confidence. It makes you lose confidence. And so the old proverb back in the book Proverbs says, hope deferred makes the heart sick. In other words, you make this promise to me and you keep reminding me of this promise, and I've waited and it hasn't happened, and I've waited a little longer and it hasn't happened, and I waited a little longer and it hasn't happened, and now a long, long time has passed, and what am I beginning to think? It's not going to happen. It's not going to happen. Do you think that force of thinking ever tried to launch into the mind of Noah? Now, he's not Super Noah, and his wife wasn't Super Mrs. Noah. He's just a guy. He's just a guy. Not any different than any of us. So do you think over 100 years of hearing this story about a rain, and maybe, I don't know how often God told him this story. I mean, you know what? We get to hear the story over and over again. We get to hear the story, for example, of heaven as often as we want to hear it. I don't know how often he heard it. But time is an enemy to hope. And therefore time, waiting is an enemy to faith. And it makes me just want to give up. It makes me just want to quit. You know, I mean, Susan's wondered for all these years we've been married, 26 years, something like that? And is he ever going to change? You know, she keeps hoping I'm going to change. Maybe in year 27 I'm going to change. 127 maybe. You know. And finally, you know, she just might throw up her hands and say, it's never going to happen. I'm stuck with that rascal the rest of my life. That's the best it's going to get, and it's not that good. You know, that's not too far off, by the way. I mean, that's so. But here's Noah, and it says, by faith, he was warned about these things, hadn't seen these things, but in holy fear, he kept working on this ark. He kept building on this ark to save his family. Isn't that interesting? He believed, and was absolutely certain that somehow God was going to bring a flood like no one can imagine. And he believed what God had said, I'm going to destroy everybody. But I'll tell you, Mr. Noah, if you will build this ark, I'll let you and your family go inside, and when everybody else dies, you'll stay alive. And he believed that. And he hoped that God would keep his promise. And for 100 years, he just keeps building. Until finally one day God says to him, looks finished to me. Let's put some animals in there. You and your family go in there. Let me shut the door on you.
So how long would it take to build it? 120 years.
Yeah, about 120 years. So in this, and he shuts the door on him. And can you imagine how Noah is feeling as he starts hearing the strange crackling outside and thunder outside, and when that boat begins to rock a little bit, when the boat begins to be lifted a little bit, sensation like he's never had. Can you imagine? And then can you imagine the smile and the gratefulness and the excitement? My family's all safe. We're okay. And before long, we're going to land somewhere. Isn't that something? Now, that's the way faith's supposed to work in our lives. Now, listen to this next verse. By faith, Abraham, when God called to go to a place he would later receive as an inheritance, obeyed and went, even though he did not know where he was going. Now, that may not sound as strange to you as did the story of Noah, but it would be tough for me to do. It'd be tough for me to do. And some of you are much more tied to home than I. So I've got a brother-in-law sitting here, and he's not been out of Cordell, and he's not going out of Cordell, is what he tells me. This is it. This is what he wants. But if you're really tied to home, and all of a sudden God says, I just want you to leave. I'll tell you later where you're going to go, but I just want you to leave. You know, and I'll tell you another thing. When you and your wife get there, I'm going to give you a child, and I know you're 90 years old, but some you'll get a child someday, or 75 years old he actually was. I know you're 75 years old, and she's 65 years old, but still going to get a child. So he becomes hopeful that God will honor what he said, and he becomes in his heart certain that God will do it. And so he takes off, and he goes, not knowing where he's going. Now, by the way, it didn't take him 100 years to get a child, but he's 75 years when he leaves, and he's traveling from place to place most of that next 25 years. 25 years later, when he is 100, guess what happens to his wife? She's going to have a baby. I'm going to tell you, I would have regretted that trip my whole life. The entire rest of my life, I would have regretted that trip. Everybody understand what I'm talking about? If you told me at this age Sue's not going to have a baby, you wouldn't see me again, folks. Neither would she. I'm going to the mountains. I'm going to become a fur trapper. I'm going to do something. But Abraham is wanting a child pretty badly, okay? And he believes, and so he just goes. Now, I know if you read carefully the story as recorded in Genesis chapter 12, 13, 14, 15, he has some rough moments. And I love to read those stories about Abraham because I love to read the rough moments because it makes me feel better. Because I have some giant promises given to me, and I need to quit, but some giant promises. I have heaven promised to me. I have God walking beside me promised to me. I have God's Spirit living inside of me to give me courage even when things aren't going well. But I still have God's promise that He's walking beside me, and He's got His Spirit inside of me, and so I can look at that and say, we're going to be okay. We're going to do what God wants, and God's going to assist us in that. That's our confidence. That's our hope. That's what I'm certain about. My job is not to fight it. My job is to be who we've been called to be. Does that make sense? Uh, don't tell me that living by faith is not important. I had a young man call me this week as I was driving that car that was starting to get hot, I guess. And he grew up in this congregation. And he said, I got to tell you, all this stuff about faith and all this stuff about trust, I had it backwards for kind of a long time, and it's been so helpful for me to get this straight and see. And we got to know, we got to learn to have faith. It starts with trust. Everybody can understand that? I can force you to obey for a little while. I can force you to obey for a little while. Donnie spent his career trying to force me to obey. And I would rebel. You know, once I saw him far enough out of my tail lights, guess what? Feet went to the floor. Not really, Donnie. I'm a good guy. But, you can force me to obey for a little while. But how long will it really last? Not long. It's when I learn from the heart to trust that then I'll obey easily and willfully. Trust always comes first.